So we were in question 4. Outline Prophet Amos' teaching on social justice and responsibility. Raise up your hand. Raise up your hand. You did not get the answers in what Amos talked about on justice and responsibility. Number 1, he talked about oppression of the poor. That is whereby you explain about them selling the poor for a piece of silver or a pair of shoes. There is also corruption and bribery. You know very well there were injustices in the court of law. There was also greed or excessive luxury, whereby the rich were condemned for their greed behavior, where they were being selfish. There was also cheating in business. That is where you talk about the weighing scales. They tampered with the weighing scales. They also overcharged on goods that were sold. There was also robbery and violence. Idolatry. They worshipped other gods, breaking the commandments of God. There was sexual immorality. You can just basically call it temple prostitution. Yes, there was widespread of sexual immorality in the land. Drunkenness, whereby Nazarites were forced to drink excessive wine. Question 4b, explain 4 differences between Old Testament prophets and the traditional African prophets. Raise up your hand. Yes?
Old Testament talked about the will of God and traditional African prophets concerned with prediction on.
Yes. Also, the Old Testament prophets received their powers from God, while the traditional ones, they got their power through inheritance. You can say through inheritance or from spirits. Old Testament prophets were both teachers and preachers. That is, they taught about the God's will. Whereas in the African prophets were only confined into predicting. They predict the future and they warn. They warn people in the society. In the Old Testament prophets also did not practice divination, whereas the African prophets they were diviners. The Old Testament prophets talked about a glorious Messiah, whereas in the traditional African society there is no mention of the Messiah. Old Testament stressed on worship of one true God, monotheism, whereas in the African prophets there is worship of gods. The Old Testament prophets' prophecies, their prophecies are written. They were in written form. Whereas in the traditional African, they are passed through oral traditions. How Christians play the role of prophets today? They are prayerful. They live a prayerful life. They live holy lives. They help the needy. Here you just basically ask yourself, what is the role of a prophet? Preaching the gospel, condemning evil, guidance and counseling, interceding for others before God, also giving messages of hope. Yes, being a good Christian model. Question 5a, state 6 symbolic acts used by Jeremiah to teach about judgment and what? Punishment. So there was the wearing of the ox yoke, the buying of the new linen waistcloth and hiding it in the cliff. We are supposed to read this. The wearing of the ox yoke is in, we'll read another time because we won't be able to complete the papers. So there is wearing of the ox yoke. There is buying new linen waistcloth, and they had to go and hide it in the what? Cleft of a rock. So Jeremiah also was not to marry. There was remolding, or you can just say reworking if you don't remember the word remolding, of the vessel by the potter. breaking of the earthen flask before the elders, and there were a basket of figs, one with good figs and the other with bad figs. Those were the symbolic acts used by Jeremiah on judgment and punishment. Question 5b is give reasons why Nehemiah carried out religious reforms in Judah. Why did he carry out religious reforms? It's to preserve the identity of the Jewish people, to preserve their identity, also to protect them from foreign influence. That is to protect the Jews from foreign influence, to purify the temple. They were purifying the temple because it had been defiled by the foreigners. And then to restore the services of priests and Levites. There was also to restore true worship of God, to cleanse the Jews who intermarried with the foreigners, and also to ensure the Sabbath was free of any business activity. Lessons Christians learn from the renewal of the covenant by Nehemiah. That is, what do you learn? You should start, what should they do? They should seek God's forgiveness, always. That is what we learn. Also lead a righteous life, so Christians you should start like that. Lead righteous life, lead a prayerful life, lead a humble life, teach others the word of God, set aside a day of worship, respect places of worship, and share with the needy. Then question 6. Can you write question 6 so that we can come when I come back? But let me tackle question 6 so that we can start paper 2 when I come. Gives 7 moral values acquired during marriage ceremony in traditional African communities. The moral values that you acquire during a marriage ceremony. You acquire faithfulness, respect. If there is a marriage ceremony, what moral values do you get? Faithfulness, respect, hard work, kindness, hospitality, because in marriage you should be hospitable. That is, you welcome visitors. Perseverance or tolerance, love, cooperation, humility, honesty. You just focused on marriage. Integrity too. Question 6b states 7 roles of ancestors in traditional African communities. The role of ancestors. The ancestors blessed the living, protected their families against calamities. They warned the living against impending danger. They safeguarded the traditions, or you can call them norms. They mediated. The ancestors also mediated between God and man. They punished offenders. They were invited in ceremonies, that is to strengthen the people. So they were invited into the ceremony in order to strengthen the people. They assisted specialists. What we mean is that they assisted specialists in their work. They welcomed the dead to the ancestral land. The last question is give 6 conditions under which divorce may be allowed in traditional African society. When is divorce allowed? When is divorce allowed in the traditional African society? If the wife is lazy, yes, laziness, or there is a witchcraft, or she's a witch. If there is a breaking of taboos, if there is a disrespect of the in-laws, if there is any unfaithfulness, failure to pay dowry, in case one is discovered to be a thief, so divorce is allowed. And if someone suffers from madness, leprosy, or epilepsy,